In the midst of the rubble and chaos caused by the earthquake, Max, the brave German shepherd, rushed headfirst into danger, saving countless innocent lives. His instincts were sharp, his courage unwavering. With every bark and every step, Max pushed forward, ignoring the peril around him, focused only on the people who needed him. But the question lingered. Could his boundless loyalty and sacrifice come at too high a cost? What happens when courage is tested by an inevitable loss? Max's journey wasn't just about saving lives. It was about a love so deep it could break hearts, leaving behind a quiet ache long after the dust settled. The earthquake hit suddenly, like a hard punch to the earth, causing the entire city of Yangon to tremble. Chris and Kevin barely had time to react, only seeing nearby buildings start to crack and break apart, power lines swaying, and the streets splitting open as if some invisible force was dragging the city into chaos. Max and Rock immediately felt the shift in the air. Max barked sharply, as if to signal the emergency. Rock dashed forward, pounding the cracked ground beneath him, his powerful body seeming to hold the team steady. Everything around them shook violently, buildings crumbling with the deafening sound of concrete smashing to the ground. Chris urgently gestured for the Valor Squad to stay in motion. Kevin yelled, his voice lost in the roar of explosions and the city's groans as it collapsed under the weight of the debris. Panic filled the air, but the Valor Squad was ready. Max sprinted ahead, leading Chris and Kevin toward the areas where signs of trapped people could be seen. Thick clouds of dust enveloped everything. Corky and Cake weren't moving as fast as usual, trapped under a pile of broken bricks. Meanwhile, Red searched for signs of survivors. Max paused for a moment, turning back to check on Chris and Kevin, as if making sure everyone was safe in the midst of this chaos. At that moment, Kevin gripped Chris's hand, his eyes reflecting worry, but his voice remained steady. "Valor Squad, get ready." He signaled to the dogs and the rescue team to continue searching for survivors beneath the rubble. Meanwhile, Corky and Cake, despite their injuries, refused to give up. They kept searching, their determination unwavering. Every move from the Valor Squad was a fight for survival, not just against the earthquake, but against the consequences of the city's paralysis and the increasingly difficult rescue efforts. The ground continued to shake with aftershocks, but Chris didn't dare stop. Kevin glanced at him, and they both knew that the dogs were their only hope at this point. Max barked loudly, as if announcing that someone was trapped. Rock kept charging forward, following the trail they had found in the wreckage. Their actions grew more urgent. There was no time to waste. The K9 speed team wasn't just facing the devastation of the earthquake. They were up against the chaos that had consumed the city. The city was nearly paralyzed. The emergency services were down, access to danger zones was blocked, and the streets were severely congested. The situation grew harder to control as fires ignited from the wreckage, making the air heavier and more dangerous. The people were frantic, but the Valor Squad had to stay calm and push forward. Through it all, Corky and Cake, though injured, remained fiercely loyal. Corky found a sign of life beneath a collapsed building. Both dogs rushed toward the spot, using their keen sense of smell to track down the signs of trapped survivors. Despite the odds, despite their pain, they refused to give up. The mission wasn't over yet, and neither were they. Despite their injuries, Corky and Cake refused to stop, each step a desperate fight for survival that couldn't be undone. Max saw them struggling, but there was no time to waste. Rock kept leading the way for Chris and Kevin, while the entire team moved cautiously toward an area of collapsed buildings that was becoming more dangerous by the second. Every step could bring a greater risk. The situation was spiraling out of control. The aftershocks kept hitting, and the cracks in the ground spread wider. But the Valor Squad kept moving forward. Max and Rock stepped into the cloud of dust and smoke, undeterred by the danger. Their courage never wavered as they pushed on, determined to find survivors in the midst of the chaos. Chris and Kevin were relentless, digging through the rubble, while Max and Rock worked as silent heroes, helping them search for signs of life. They weren't just search and rescue dogs. They were symbols of loyalty, sacrifice, and unconditional friendship. The team worked tirelessly, not giving up in the midst of the chaos. Kevin and Chris kept giving orders, never pausing, knowing that thousands of lives were still waiting to be saved. Max's bark cut through the roar of the collapsing city, a call to action for the team to search harder. But in that moment, something unexpected began to unfold. It wasn't just the disaster they were facing. A group of insurgents had taken advantage of the chaos to attack and seize resources. Kevin felt the danger from behind, where the rubble had become the perfect hiding spot for the enemy. The sound of gunfire suddenly rang out, unlike the natural noises of destruction and aftershocks. These were the sounds of weapons being fired. Chris immediately sensed the shift in the atmosphere. Tension filled the air, and Max, with his sharp sense of smell, barked again, signaling that danger was close. Chris turned to Kevin, his eyes darkening with realization. He gripped Kevin's hand, his voice urgent. "Kevin, it's not just the earthquake. We've got enemies here." Kevin looked around, the danger closing in. "It's insurgents. They're using this chaos to attack." Chris stopped for a moment, his gaze fixed on the dusty cloud that hid the enemy. "So, what do we do?" Kevin didn't answer immediately. His eyes clouded with thought before he quietly gave the order. "Protect the team. We have to keep rescuing people, but we have to deal with the enemy first." Max and Rock stayed alert. Max barked loudly, and Rock perked up, his ears high, his head tilting as if he was detecting something dangerous. "What does that mean?" Chris asked. "We fight." Kevin's voice was tense, but resolute. "The insurgents could attack at any time. Don't let them stop us." Chris looked at Kevin as if wanting to say something, but instead he just nodded, his expression unchanged. He took a deep breath, glanced at the Valor Squad, and then spoke with unwavering resolve. "Saving lives comes first. We can sacrifice, but civilian lives are above everything else. Don't hesitate over anything." Kevin could feel the determination in Chris's words, and he nodded in return, though his eyes never left the dangerous debris around them. "We'll keep rescuing, Chris, but we need to handle the insurgents fast. If we don't, things will only get worse." Max and Rock led the way for the Valor Squad, pushing forward into the most dangerous areas while Chris and Kevin kept up the search. The Valor Squad couldn't stop. Max was tirelessly searching for signs of life beneath the rubble, while Chris and Kevin moved quickly, racing against time. Now, as the Valor Squad worked tirelessly among the ruins, Chris and Kevin couldn't help but think back to the moments before everything began, before the earthquake shattered the peace in Yangon. The K9 Speed Team was conducting a mock rescue training exercise in Yangon, Myanmar. The dogs, Max, Rock, Red, Corky, and Cake, had been thoroughly trained, and today they faced a challenging test, navigating through rubble and searching for survivors in a completely destroyed area. Chris and Kevin, the team's handlers, observed from a nearby vantage point, evaluating the dogs' skills and teamwork. "We need to make sure the team can perform under pressure, especially when conditions are unpredictable," Kevin spoke, watching the Valor Squad in action. He had full faith in Max and the other dogs, but as he looked at the collapsed brick walls and massive obstacles, he couldn't shake the worry about how the team would react in a real-life situation. Chris nodded. "We need to test the Valor Squad in the most realistic scenario possible. Let them prove their abilities." He gave the order to start the training again. As Max led the team, Marking survivor locations through the wreckage, Rock continued to navigate the obstacles, working in sync with Red and Corky. Cake worked tirelessly, using her keen sense of smell to locate those trapped beneath the debris. Every step they took had one clear purpose: to save lives from the shattered concrete. But while everyone was focused on the training, the atmosphere in Yangon was anything but stable. Kevin looked out into the distance, sensing the changes in the political climate and the situation in Myanmar. Even though the Valor Squad's mission was crucial, he couldn't shake the feeling of unease about the escalating tensions between Myanmar and Ukraine. This isn't good. The news about the conflict, the rising political tension, it's time we prepare for the worst. Kevin's voice dropped, heavy with concern. Chris also sensed it, the increasing instability in the region. We can't afford to be careless, but I trust the Valor Squad. Our team is ready for anything. Chris's gaze was firm, yet there was an underlying worry about what might lie ahead. The training continued, preparing for simulated rescue missions, but outside, the atmosphere thickened. Political tensions were becoming increasingly evident, with news of earthquakes and rising turmoil in the region flooding in. Chris and Kevin had been warned about the instability in the area, but no one expected the earthquake to hit so soon. Max and the other dogs kept working tirelessly through the drills, searching for signs of life beneath the broken concrete. The simulated scenarios felt intense, but they trusted the Valor Squad's skills and their ability to handle anything. Still, Chris and Kevin couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation. The political climate outside was growing more alarming by the minute. A political battle was beginning to surface, and the news of the ongoing conflict between Ukraine and Myanmar had become the focal point. Attacks were occurring regularly, and Chris felt the heavy burden of responsibility. The Valor Squad wasn't just up against natural disasters anymore. They were facing the threat of enemies exploiting the chaos. The events unfolding raised a question in his mind. What would the Valor Squad do when they were not only battling an earthquake, but also insurgents taking advantage of the disorder? Kevin looked back at Chris, the worry clear in his eyes. Can we handle this in time? Kevin wasn't just concerned about the risks from the earthquake, but also the unknown threat from those who might attack them in the midst of the chaos. Chris felt a deep tension in his chest, but he pushed the panic away. We've trained for every situation, Kevin. The Valor Squad won't back down, he said, though a lingering fear echoed inside him. Suddenly, a sharp sound pierced the air. Kevin and Chris turned immediately, hearing gunshots from a distance. A barrage of gunfire broke out, causing the Valor Squad to stop in their tracks, and panic began to spread through the rescue team. Gunfire! We're being attacked! Kevin shouted. Chris's eyes sharpened. Insurgents, he growled, his voice low. They're exploiting the chaos to attack. The Valor Squad was ready. Max immediately turned around, while Rock's ears perked up, preparing for any danger that might come their way. We need to act quickly. The insurgents could strike at any moment, Chris said sternly, looking at Kevin. How do we protect the team and save lives, Kevin? They couldn't shake the fear that the ongoing conflict would affect the Valor Squad's rescue efforts. Would they have enough time to save everyone before the insurgents, or anyone else, took advantage of the chaos to stop the mission? Chris couldn't deny the haunting fear that had lingered in his mind throughout the training. He had been through many rescue missions before, but this one was different. This environment wasn't just about natural disaster. It was framed by unstable political tension. Extreme situations were no longer something he could simply prepare for. The earthquake was more than just a test for the Valor Squad. It was the turning point of a life-or-death mission, where danger came at them from every direction. Kevin, standing beside Chris, couldn't shake the nagging feeling of worry. The political tension in the air only made him more uneasy. It felt like a battle not only against nature's wrath, but also against those who would exploit the chaos for their own gain. But Kevin didn't dare voice all of those thoughts. He knew they had to act quickly. Lives were still waiting to be saved. Every moment of hesitation could cost someone their life. "Chris, I don't know anymore," Kevin sighed, his eyes following every move the Valor Squad made. "This is really serious. The insurgents could attack at any moment. We can't just focus on saving people, we have to protect the Valor Squad, too." Chris didn't answer right away. He looked at the Valor Squad working tirelessly. Max barked loudly, running through the wreckage, searching for survivors while staying alert to every aftershock. Chris looked into Max's eyes of a companion who never left his side, a fighter with one purpose: saving lives. "Max and the team have been trained for this, Kevin. We can't back down." Chris turned to Kevin, his own eyes filled with unease. "We've been warned about this, Kevin. But the Valor Squad won't back down. They'll face any danger. We have to trust them." Kevin nodded, but the worry weighed heavily on his heart. He knew the Valor Squad was their best hope to save lives in this situation. But could they handle everything? Nature's fury and the threat from insurgents? Every decision they made wasn't just a matter of saving the trapped victims, but also of ensuring the survival of the Valor Squad itself. Chris stood up, his gaze fixed on Max and the other dogs working relentlessly. "Everything's ready, Kevin. We have to act now. We can't afford to delay. The Valor Squad won't let us fail." Kevin looked at Chris, his expression resolute, but the fatigue was clear in his eyes. He knew what they were facing wasn't just a natural disaster. It was also the threat from humans, from those who sought to exploit the situation. "We can't let this destroy all our rescue efforts, but we must be ready to face the attackers." They both knew the Valor Squad was their only hope. But could they save everyone when the world around them was teetering on the edge of constant danger? Kevin didn't answer immediately. He felt the danger closing in, and the tension made everything feel uncertain. Protecting the Valor Squad and keeping civilians safe is the priority, but we can't let the insurgents destroy everything we've worked for. Chris took a deep breath, lifting his head to look at the Valor Squad. "Saving lives is more important, Kevin. We can sacrifice, but civilian lives come first. Don't let hesitation slow us down." Kevin nodded, recognizing the determination in Chris's eyes. They couldn't give up now. "Move forward. We can't stop. Saving lives and protecting the Valor Squad is our mission." Max, Rock, Corky, Cake, and Red had all been trained rigorously, with simulated scenarios that were nearly as real as the disaster itself. Chris and Kevin stood at a distance, watching the Valor Squad in action. They needed to be sure the team could handle the unexpected in a real-life disaster. Chris closely observed Max and Rock's every move as they navigated through obstacles. The simulated rubble, the difficult barriers, awaited them. Max quickly identified the dangerous areas, stretching out to search for signs of life beneath the shattered concrete. Meanwhile, Rock stayed close, always alert, helping the team move safely through the more treacherous zones. Corky and Cake were no less impressive. The two dogs began checking their assigned areas, working with precision. Cake quickly picked up on a scent, signaling Kevin. "Cake's found something," Kevin ordered the team to approach. The Valor Squad moved forward, with Max leading the way, stepping firmly into the ground to clear the path for the rest of the team. Chris and Kevin watched intently. "It's looking good," Chris muttered, his eyes never leaving the dogs. "Max and the Valor Squad are doing great. They're ready for this mission." Everything was unfolding like a perfect training exercise. The Valor Squad continued to work quickly and efficiently. But it was in this moment that Chris and Kevin realized how much harder the real mission would be. They were about to face real danger, and the Valor Squad's skills would need to be tested under true, unrelenting pressure. Nothing could fully prepare them for the reality of a disaster. Suddenly, a building collapsed right before their eyes, and the Valor Squad had no time to prepare for the situation. Corky and Cake were trapped under the rubble. In an instant, the team had to act. Max and Rock rushed in, but this wasn't an easy situation. Corky couldn't free herself, and Cake's paw was caught in a pile of heavy bricks. Kevin immediately barked orders. "Max, Rock, move now!" As Max and Rock continued searching for signs of life in other areas, Corky and Cake couldn't free themselves. Chris and Kevin were terrified, but they didn't have the luxury of panic. Every second mattered, and they had to remain calm, directing the Valor Squad to work together despite the growing tension. "Everyone, get into position," Chris commanded firmly. Max immediately used his nose to pinpoint Corky's exact location, while Rock checked the debris and began pushing it away. Kevin rushed over to help Chris and the dogs. Max worked tirelessly, using his strength to move the concrete rubble off Corky, while Cake continued to cry out, as if calling for the rescue team. "Watch out!" Kevin shouted. The sound of breaking bricks grew louder as more concrete continued to collapse around them. Everything erupted into chaos. The Valor Squad pressed on, but fear hung in the air. Chris couldn't let the Valor Squad work without close supervision. Max and Rock stayed in position, undeterred by the mounting danger around them. They were not just rescue dogs. They were the last hope for those trapped, the silent warriors who would never abandon their post. Max, Rock, Corky, and Cake worked tirelessly, never stopping to check each piece of debris, searching for any way to free Corky and Cake from the rubble. "Hurry up!" Kevin shouted, his voice tight with urgency, but his eyes betrayed the deep worry within. Every second of delay could mean a lost life. With all his strength, Max pulled a concrete slab off of Corky, who had been nearly buried. Rock rushed to Cake, continuing to help. But the danger was still ever present. The aftershocks kept shaking the ground, causing more debris to fall around them. After what felt like an eternity, Corky and Cake were freed, but both were weak and injured. Max and Rock quickly moved to help, supporting Corky to his feet, while Cake needed similar assistance. "Thank you, Max, Rock," Chris said, his breath coming in quick gasps. He smiled, but the worry in his eyes remained. "We need to move now," Kevin barked, his voice leaving no room for sentiment. "Keep going." With Corky and Cake rescued, the Valor Squad didn't have time to breathe. Max, Rock, Cake, and Corky remained steadfast, but they knew their mission wasn't finished yet. Chris and Kevin understood that they were not just fighting against the earthquake, but also the unforeseen dangers lurking within the debris. The team had saved some lives, but no one knew how many more they could rescue. Max, despite the wounds he'd suffered from the wreckage, stood firm. His eyes burned with determination, never straying from his goal. Rock, too, refused to back down. His powerful legs seemed tireless. However, the injuries Corky and Cake had sustained were a clear testament to the brutality of the situation. Corky had been struck by a falling concrete slab, injuring his leg, making it hard for him to stand for long. Yet, the dog gritted his teeth, refusing to fall. Cake had been impaled by a shard of steel, bleeding from the wound, but still tried to move with the help of the team. "We can't stop, Kevin," Chris said, his voice resolute as he looked at the dogs. "The Valor Squad has done amazing, but now's not the time to rest. We must continue." He turned to Kevin, his eyes filled with determination. Kevin furrowed his brow, glancing at Corky and Cake, then shaking his head. "I know, Chris, but the Valor Squad is exhausted. They've taken so much damage and we can't keep pushing them like this. The situation won't hold for long." He sighed, but his voice remained serious. "Every second we waste, the situation becomes more dangerous." Chris stood up, refusing to let his own fatigue stand in his way. He walked over to Max and slapped his back with a firm hand. "Max, Rock, we can't stop." His voice rang with strength. "Team, we move now. No more delays." Kevin looked at Chris, the worry still evident in his eyes. But he knew there was no other choice but to press forward. He glanced at Corky and Cake, struggling to stand. "We'll keep going. But if the Valor Squad can't take it any longer, can we keep saving people?" he asked, his voice low and uncertain. Chris clenched his jaw, his eyes fixed on Corky and Cake. "We have to give everything we've got. No matter what, we won't leave anyone behind." Max and Rock led the way, never stopping, even as the ground beneath them continued to shake. Aftershocks rattled the earth, causing more cracks to spread, and massive slabs of concrete fell around them. But Chris and Kevin couldn't afford to stop. "Watch out!" Kevin yelled as another large piece of concrete crashed down near the team. But the Valor Squad didn't hesitate. Max and Rock moved swiftly, their determination unwavering, despite the injuries they had sustained. Chris and Kevin hurried after the Valor Squad. Max's bark echoed from a distance. "This feels awful, but we have to move," Kevin said, his voice tight with tension. "If we don't, we won't save anyone." "Saving lives is the priority, Kevin. But we can't put the Valor Squad in more danger." Chris's voice was firm. "Civilians come first." The Valor Squad continued to move with urgency. Max and Rock led the way, eyes focused on the signs of survivors beneath the rubble. The other dogs kept going, despite their severe injuries. For Max, Rock, Corky, and Cake, every step was a fight for survival. And Chris and Kevin knew they couldn't stop, no matter the risks. The entire team had to rebuild the city, not only rescuing lives but also facing the unimaginable dangers of aftershocks and insurgent attacks. "We can't back down, Kevin," Chris said, his voice steady, a declaration of strength. "The Valor Squad has proven their power and resilience. Nothing can stop them, and neither can we." Kevin looked at Chris, knowing this would be the greatest challenge of their careers. Yet, he still believed in the Valor Squad. They were the quiet warriors, dogs with unconditional loyalty. The dogs were still giving their all, searching for signs of life under the wreckage. Their barks echoed through the chaos, the only signals in this disaster. Since the earthquake struck, Yangon had been completely transformed. Buildings had collapsed, roads were cut off, and all lines of communication had been severed. The devastation covered the entire area. The once bustling streets were now empty and lifeless. Homes, high-rises, and shops lay crushed under layers of concrete and rubble. Chris and Kevin, with the Valor Squad, couldn't afford to slow down. They had received orders to move into the more dangerous areas, where buildings had completely collapsed. They pressed on, moving forward without any communication from the outside world. The entire region felt like a wasteland, and only the Valor Squad could save the survivors in this situation. Every step they took now felt like a battle for survival. The aftershocks kept coming, making the ground shake and sending more debris crashing down. Danger was in every second, but Max, Rock, and the other dogs never stopped moving. Chris and Kevin, too. They knew there was no time for hesitation. "Move quickly, but be careful with every step." Kevin's voice rang out, his eyes burning with determination. Max led the way, his sharp eyes focused on the smallest signs of survivors beneath the rubble. Rock stayed close, using his nose and paws to check every nook and cranny. Meanwhile, Corky and Cake were relentlessly tracking signs of life. "We need to go into that area now," Chris said, his gaze firm. They entered an area that had been devastated. Buildings were completely destroyed, roads blocked, and there was no outside help coming. Everything was utter chaos, and danger lurked around every corner. The Valor Squad had to navigate through massive obstacles, from shattered concrete slabs to broken glass, and unstable areas that could collapse at any moment. Chris glanced at Kevin, their eyes meeting as if sharing the same unspoken worry. They both knew that this mission wouldn't be easy. The team was facing a job that was not only difficult, but also pushing them to their limits. "We can't let this chaos slow us down," Kevin decided, issuing orders to the team while keeping his gaze on the piles of rubble. "Max, Rock, keep moving." Max and Rock pushed forward through the debris, nothing slowing them down. Corky and Cake continued their search. The Valor Squad knew that if they didn't act now, they would miss crucial opportunities to save lives. The ground under Chris and Kevin's feet rumbled with aftershocks, each tremor making everything even more unstable. Yet the Valor Squad didn't stop. They pressed into the danger zones, moving past the rubble, and Chris and Kevin could only rely on the Valor Squad to do their job flawlessly. "Careful with every step," Chris ordered, his eyes sharp with focus. The team kept moving, unstoppable. Despite the constant dangers, they remained brave, continuing their life-saving work. "Exactly, Chris. We have to keep going." "But things are getting much harder," Kevin said, looking back at Max, Rock, Corky, and Cake. The dogs were still giving their all, searching for signs of life beneath the rubble. Their barks echoed in the chaos, the only signals in this disaster. Since the earthquake struck, Yangon had changed completely. Buildings had collapsed, roads were cut off, and all communication lines were severed. The scene of devastation engulfed the area. The once bustling streets were now empty and lifeless. Homes, high-rises, and stores had been crushed under layers of concrete and bricks. Chris and Kevin, along with the Valor Squad, couldn't slow down. They had been ordered to move into the more dangerous areas, where buildings had completely collapsed. They kept moving forward, with no contact from the outside world. The entire area felt like a wasteland, and only the Valor Squad could save lives in this situation. There was no help coming from the outside. The entire area felt like a dead zone, and only the Valor Squad had the power to save lives in this situation. Every step they took had become a battle for survival. The aftershocks kept rattling the ground, causing more debris to fall. Every second was filled with danger. But Max, Rock, and the other dogs never stopped moving. Chris and Kevin did the same. They knew there was no time to hesitate. "Work quickly, but be careful with every step," Kevin called out, his gaze filled with resolve. Max led the charge, his bright eyes focused on the smallest signs of life beneath the rubble. Rock stayed close, using his nose and paws to check every corner. Meanwhile, Corky and Cake continued their relentless search for survivors. "We need to get into that area now," Chris decided, his eyes unwavering. They moved into a heavily damaged zone. Buildings had been flattened, roads were blocked, and there was no help coming from the outside. The scene was chaotic, with danger lurking everywhere. The Valor Squad had to navigate through massive obstacles, broken concrete, shards of glass, and unstable areas that could collapse at any moment. Chris looked at Kevin, their eyes meeting, silently sharing the worry they both felt. They both knew that this mission wouldn't be easy. The whole team was facing a task that was not only difficult, but also pushed them to their limits. "We can't let this chaos slow us down," Kevin decided, issuing orders to the team while his eyes scanned the rubble. "Max, Rock, keep moving." Max and Rock kept pushing forward. Nothing could slow them down. Corky and Cake continued searching. The Valor Squad knew that if they didn't act now, they would miss critical opportunities to save lives. The ground beneath Chris and Kevin shook with every aftershock, each one making everything more unstable. But the Valor Squad didn't stop. They moved through the danger zones, past the debris, and Chris and Kevin could only rely on the Valor Squad to do their job flawlessly. "Be careful with every step," Chris ordered, his eyes sharp with focus. The team kept moving, unstoppable. Despite the constant danger, they remained brave, continuing their life-saving work. "Exactly, Chris. We have to keep going. But things are much harder now," Kevin said, glancing back at Max, Rock, Corky, and Cake. The dogs were still working tirelessly, searching for signs of life under the rubble. Their barks echoed through the chaos, the only signals in this disaster. Since the earthquake hit, Yangon had changed completely. Buildings had collapsed, roads were cut off, and all communication had been severed. The devastation covered the entire area. The once busy streets were now empty and lifeless. Homes, high-rises, and stores had been crushed under layers of concrete and rubble. Chris and Kevin, with the Valor Squad, couldn't afford to slow down. They had been ordered to move into the more dangerous areas, where buildings had completely collapsed. They pressed forward with no contact from the outside world. The entire area felt like a wasteland, and only the Valor Squad could save lives in this situation. Max moved forward into the rubble, not needing any direction from Chris or Kevin. The dog had been trained to such a degree that it instinctively recognized danger and acted without hesitation. Max's sharp eyes never left the large slabs of concrete, knowing there could be someone trapped beneath. The air was thick with smoke and dust, but Max didn't flinch. It moved carefully through each piece of debris, its powerful legs unimpeded by the heavy materials. Meanwhile, Rock continued to sweep through every area, using its keen nose to search for any signs of life. Rock's steps never slowed, its vigilance never wavering. Its eyes remained locked on the rubble ahead, and despite the constant aftershocks, Rock never stopped checking the cracks, the falling dust, and even the smallest sounds that might indicate someone was still alive. Chris and Kevin kept pace behind the Valor Squad, always observing and directing from the back. They knew their steps had to be measured and controlled to ensure safety. "Valor Squad, keep moving. Be careful," Kevin ordered, his voice filled with seriousness and determination. Suddenly, a powerful aftershock struck, causing the ground beneath Chris and Kevin to give way. Before either of them could react, Chris was pulled from the ground and fell into a deep hole beneath their feet. The air thickened with dust, and the sound of the earth groaning and rocks crashing down surrounded them. Max and Rock noticed immediately. Max barked loudly, eyes wide with concern as it saw Chris in danger. Without hesitation, Max charged forward, lunging down into the hole and grabbing Chris by the collar with its mouth. Rock wasn't far behind. It bolted toward the hole, using its strength to pull Chris out, struggling but determined. Kevin watched the scene unfold, his heart sinking, but he wouldn't allow himself to falter. "Everyone, be careful! Don't stop!" Kevin shouted, his voice taut with urgency. He rushed to Chris, helping him stand, but never taking his eyes off their surroundings. The ground was still trembling, but Max and Rock remained steadfast, not leaving their positions. Chris gasped for breath, feeling the strain in his body, but knowing they couldn't stop now. Despite the sharp pain coursing through him, he understood the lives of so many depended on the speed and decisiveness of the Valor Squad. "Thank you, Max, Rock," Chris said, his voice choking, but there was no time to rest. "We can't slow down, Chris," Kevin said, his tone sharp and commanding. "We need to move now. Valor Squad, stay alert with every step." Max and Rock led the way again, continuing to search for survivors beneath the shattered concrete. Cake and Corky, though exhausted and injured, refused to give up. Every step they took was a sacrifice, a battle against their own fatigue and pain. Chris and Kevin pressed on, the tension palpable. "We can't slow down. Saving people is our mission, but we also have to protect the Valor Squad." Kevin repeated the words he had spoken earlier. Each step the Valor Squad took now was a life-or-death struggle, but none of them faltered. Max and Rock continued their relentless pursuit of survival, leading the team through danger with an unbreakable spirit. No matter what, they would keep going. They were more than just rescue dogs. They were heroes, undeterred by the chaos that surrounded them. Max led the way, its eyes scanning for even the slightest signs of life beneath the rubble. Every step it took reflected unwavering resilience and loyalty. Meanwhile, Chris and Kevin kept moving behind the Valor Squad, always observing and giving orders to ensure the rescue efforts continued. However, Chris could still feel the weight of exhaustion pressing down on him after the fall earlier. Kevin glanced at Chris, sensing the tension that still hung in the air. But there was no time to stop, not with every second counting and survivors still depending on them. "Are you okay?" Kevin asked, his voice hoarse with stress. Chris turned to look at Kevin, his eyes still filled with resolve. "I'm fine, but we can't stop." His voice betrayed the worry he felt deep inside. Just then, Max barked loudly, bringing Kevin and Chris to a halt. Rock continued leading the way, guiding the Valor Squad toward an area where they suspected survivors might be trapped. But as they entered the area, a thunderous roar echoed, and the ground beneath them began to shake again. "Be careful! Don't let the debris collapse any further!" Kevin shouted. He quickly glanced at Chris, directing the Valor Squad and the rescue team to move toward the trapped survivors. Everything seemed to descend into chaos. The rumble of crumbling concrete, the barks of Max and Rock echoed through the mayhem. Every moment was tense, the ground shaking beneath them with aftershocks. Chris looked at Kevin, a rising sense of dread filling his chest. A thought flickered in his mind. Can they keep rescuing people in this dangerous situation without causing more harm? Max and Rock dove into the wreckage, continuing their search for survivors. Cake and Corky, though exhausted, didn't stop either. The Valor Squad pushed themselves to the limit, with no time for rest. However, Chris and Kevin now faced a crucial decision. Chris looked over at the Valor Squad, where Max and Rock were checking every crevice in the rubble. He knew that while the Valor Squad had done an exceptional job, they couldn't afford to step back. Saving lives was their priority, but to keep rescuing more people, the Valor Squad would have to face even greater dangers. "We can't stop, Kevin," Chris said, his voice steady but firm. "But I can't leave the dogs behind. We need to save people, but we can't put the Valor Squad in more danger." Kevin looked at him, understanding the concern in Chris's eyes, but also knowing there was no choice but to push forward. "You're right, Chris," he nodded. "We have to keep moving. We can't waste another second." But Chris's worry didn't fade. He knew that in this situation, every decision would affect not just the lives of the people they were trying to save, but the lives of the K-9s as well. Max and Rock had already saved him from the hole earlier, but now he was left to wonder. Could the Valor Squad continue, knowing every step was a fight for survival in this never-ending nightmare? Kevin looked at the dogs, then at Chris. He knew they all felt the weight of the situation. But Chris was right. They couldn't stop. They had to keep rescuing people, no matter the dangers. "We have to keep moving. We can't slow down anymore," Kevin ordered once again, his voice filled with determination. "Saving people and protecting the Valor Squad is our main mission. We can't stop." Chris nodded, though his mind was still clouded with worries. However, he knew that only decisive action would help them weather this storm. The Valor Squad continued to move forward, undeterred by the danger. Every step Max, Rock, Cake, and Corky took held great significance. The Valor Squad was no longer just a group of rescue dogs. They were warriors, ready to face even the hardest challenges. Chris and Kevin stayed in motion, their eyes always fixed on the team. They knew that every second mattered, but they also understood that there was no time to rest. "Team, keep moving," Chris commanded. The tension still hung thick in the air, but no one could afford to stop. Max, Rock, Cake, and Corky's loyalty fueled them. The dogs didn't stop searching for survivors in the wreckage, giving their all to save lives and complete the mission. Standing amidst the rubble of Yangon, their eyes never left the Valor Squad as they carried out their mission. The ground beneath them trembled with constant aftershocks, and the air was thick with smoke and dust. The shattered buildings lay in ruins, with sunlight filtering through the cracks in the destroyed structures, casting light on the devastation below. The faint cries for help echoed from all directions, blending with the hurried footsteps and the heavy breathing of the dogs. Max, Rock, Red, Corky, and Cake, Chris and Kevin's loyal companions, never stopped. Each step they took felt like a race against time. The dogs used their sharp noses to sniff and listen, while their handlers carefully signaled and observed, making sure every move counted. Chris and Kevin stood side by side, their eyes filled with tension and concern. "We need to move fast. Time is running out," Kevin said, his voice low, but the anxiety was clear. The earthquake had changed everything. This city was no longer the familiar place it once was. The roads were unrecognizable, torn apart by the quake. Even the strongest buildings had collapsed in an instant. Now the K9 Speed Team's task was to search for and save the remaining survivors in this area, a task that could not afford a single mistake. Max led the way, ears alert, moving with purpose like a warrior. Rock followed closely, his sharp eyes scanning the rubble. Red, though smaller than Max, moved swiftly through the debris with the same fighting spirit. Corky and Cake stuck together, exhausted, yet showing no signs of stopping. Chris signaled to Kevin, and both moved to the next area the Valor Squad was checking. The dogs kept searching meticulously, leaving no stone unturned, no sign of life ignored. Suddenly, a loud crash sounded. A building collapsed in the distance. The whole team froze, and before they could react, Corky, the smallest of the dogs, was buried under a massive pile of debris. The sight was a shock to both Chris and Kevin. No one had expected this, but it happened too quickly. Max and Cake didn't hesitate. Without thinking, they rushed toward the rubble. Max, with his strength and bravery, grabbed Corky's collar and pulled with all his might, but he could only move a small part of Corky from the wreckage. Cake quickly moved in, using her keen nose to find any gaps, helping Max push Corky out of the danger zone. Chris and Kevin rushed forward, but their steps were slowed by the chaos around them. Another building was on the verge of collapsing. "Be careful!" Kevin shouted. "Hurry, we don't have time!" The Valor Squad continued without delay. Max, Cake, Rock, and Red all focused on saving Corky, never stopping. They weren't just rescue dogs. They were loyal companions who would never give up. When Corky was finally pulled from the rubble, everyone exhaled in relief. Despite being exhausted, Corky was alive. The dogs sat down, breathing heavily, but their eyes never left the task at hand. The whole team understood that this mission wasn't over. In just a moment, they would have to resume searching for life among the debris. Chris and Kevin's faith in the Valor Squad grew stronger than ever. These dogs weren't just saving lives. They were the embodiment of sacrifice and unwavering loyalty. The K9 Speed Team was an irreplaceable part of this fight, and they would not stop until the mission was complete. As the debris continued to fall, the cries for help from those still trapped echoed through the smoke-filled air. Chris and Kevin, alongside the Valor Squad, never lost hope. Each time they found a survivor, it fueled their determination to keep going. Despite the constant danger, every life saved from the rubble brought a renewed sense of hope. The K9 Speed Team wasn't just fighting nature. They were facing their own trials of perseverance and fighting spirit. Chris and Kevin stood by, watching each dog perform their task, from Rock with his keen nose to Max leading the way with unmatched skill. Every time Max sniffed out a survivor, the whole team seemed to gain new strength. The dogs sprinted, diving into the debris without hesitation. Even when injured, the cuts from the rubble didn't diminish the determination in their eyes. Kevin gasped for breath, gripping his support stick tightly as he hurried after Max, wiping the sweat off his brow. "We've got less than 20 minutes before another aftershock could hit," he said, his voice low and tense. Chris looked at the dogs. "We can't stop. We have to keep going. Just a little more." Max paused for a moment as its nose caught a strange scent. Its paws moved forward slowly, carefully, and then, suddenly, it rushed toward a pile of debris. Rock followed immediately, digging through the rubble with determination. "There's someone down there!" Chris shouted, his eyes lighting up with hope. Everyone rushed over. The Valor Squad had found a survivor. A girl lay motionless beneath a heavy layer of rubble, her breath weak and shallow. Kevin rushed to her side, quickly checking her condition, while Chris gestured for Max and Rock to continue digging. Corky and Cake stood nearby, panting heavily, their eyes fixed on the task at hand. Kevin hurriedly removed his jacket and draped it over the girl, trying to keep her warm while Chris and the dogs continued their work. "She's alive," Kevin murmured, "but we need to get her out quickly." Chris felt a deep, indescribable restlessness. He couldn't contain the emotions swelling inside him as he watched the dogs tirelessly continue their mission. The Valor Squad, with their incredible resilience, was achieving the impossible. Each dog was a warrior, ignoring pain and fatigue, understanding that the lives of many depended on every step they took. Max continued digging vigorously beneath the rubble, while Rock, working in perfect harmony with Chris, cleared the debris rapidly. Every tiny sound from beneath made their hearts race. Could anyone still be alive down there? "Be careful!" Chris shouted, as a part of the rubble was about to collapse. Max immediately pulled back, glancing up at Chris, following his command without hesitation. Despite the dangers of the aftershocks looming, Max remained utterly calm. The team kept digging, and after a few tense minutes, a small man emerged, completely buried except for his head and hands. He looked up, his eyes wide with panic, but he saw the light from the rescue team. "Help me!" His voice was faint, nearly inaudible. Without wasting a moment, Kevin reached forward, pulling the man out from beneath the rubble. A surge of emotion flooded Chris's chest. It wasn't just because they had saved a life, but because they had managed to maintain their fighting spirit. Saving one person was incredibly important, but saving many more, using every bit of their strength, meant even more. The Valor Squad continued working relentlessly. Though exhausted, they never stopped, as they and Chris and Kevin faced each new challenge. Amid the constant threat of aftershocks, the Valor Squad remained a beacon of hope in the darkness, a source of encouragement for the survivors. The sky darkened, and a deafening explosion echoed, shaking the earth and sky. "Unbelievable," Chris gasped, his eyes fixed on the sky where streaks of light flared up. A nuclear bomb had dropped from the sky, and the entire city of Yangon trembled under its terrifying force. The explosion's shockwave obliterated everything in its path, and the dark cloud from the blast rose high into the sky, engulfing everything below. From behind, a group of insurgents was exploiting the chaos. They weren't just attacking, they were extinguishing the last hopes of the survivors. They had dropped the bomb to accelerate the city's collapse, preventing rescue teams from reaching those still alive. Max and Rock stood firm, unshaken. Their eyes never left the rescue team struggling to navigate the rubble. With a warrior's instinct, Max surged forward, while Rock, alongside Kevin, quickly assisted the remaining civilians, guiding them out of danger. "Go, move faster!" Kevin yelled, sweat pouring down his face. There was nothing more he could do but protect the civilians while the sky continued to pour down with dark ash. Even though the Valor Squad had already saved many, they now faced more than just rubble. The nuclear bomb had turned everything into complete chaos. Chris and Kevin felt the full weight of the situation. All routes were cut off, and now it wasn't just about rescue. It was about confronting a terrifying force. "We need to act immediately," Chris said, his voice filled with resolve. "We can't let these terrorists win. We must stop them before they harm more people." Max let out a sharp growl, his eyes full of unwavering determination. With lightning speed, Max led the charge, pushing back the terrorists closing in. Rock continued to guard Kevin and the remaining survivors, never faltering in the face of extreme danger. The insurgents had used the earthquake and the nuclear bomb to cripple the city. But the K9 Speed team didn't hesitate. Every decision, every action they took, was aimed at one goal: protecting lives, even in the darkest moments. While Chris and Kevin faced off with a group of insurgents trying to destroy the rescue routes, Max and Rock fought tirelessly. Max's bright eyes weren't just a reflection of loyalty. They were a beacon of hope for those in despair. Chris felt there was no time to waste. The bomb had destroyed the entire system, and now they had to fight to survive, to protect the people they could still save. He and Kevin had to face the attackers while maintaining their rescue mission. The situation was tense to the extreme. Every second that passed could be the last for someone. Chris and Kevin knew they couldn't just focus on defeating the enemies. They had to save lives, help those trapped. The question still lingered in their minds. Would the Valor Squad have enough strength to protect everyone in this situation? Or would they be forced to face even greater danger due to the actions of the terrorists? The entire city still lay in the ruins of the nuclear bomb and the brutal attacks from insurgent groups. Faced with an unpredictable danger, Chris and Kevin knew they couldn't let these terrorists continue their devastation and bloodshed. Every step the Valor Squad took now wasn't just about saving lives, it was a battle to hold on to hope. Max, with his sharp eyes and unwavering heart, showed no signs of fatigue. Even though his injuries hadn't healed, the dog fought relentlessly, bringing strength and faith to the survivors. "One more person in the danger zone, Max," Kevin shouted, pointing towards the rubble. "We can't leave them behind." Max heard and immediately charged forward. The dog didn't need further instructions, nor protection. It simply did what it was trained to do. Max's sharp claws scraped through the shattered concrete as he moved into the most perilous area, where fierce flames were burning. With each step, the Valor Squad and Chris felt the unyielding strength of this loyal dog. Max didn't care about the danger. All he knew was that a life was trapped, and that was all that mattered. "Max!" Chris called out, his voice full of worry but also trust. "Be careful. That's too dangerous." But Max didn't stop. He plunged into the fiery area, uncaring of the flames surrounding him. He weaved through the debris, the thick smell of smoke filling the air. But nothing could stop Max. With unwavering loyalty, Max pressed on, ready to sacrifice everything to save that life. Kevin, his hands tightly gripping Rock's leash, watched Max. Every second felt like a tightening knot in his chest. "Max, don't make me scared," he whispered, his eyes never leaving the dog. The sky remained gloomy, and light rain began to fall, but in their hearts, a fire burned brightly. Max wasn't just a rescue dog, he was a symbol of sacrifice and absolute loyalty. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Max returned with the last survivor in his arms, a woman who was badly injured but still alive. The entire Valor Squad exhaled in relief as they saw the dog come back. But they also realized more than ever that without Max, they wouldn't have overcome these challenges. Chris and Kevin rushed over, pulling the woman to safety, away from the danger zone. Max stood beside them, his eyes filled with resolve, as if saying, "My mission is not over, but I've done all I can." In that moment, A sense of peace washed over the Valor Squad. They knew that no matter how great the danger, the love and loyalty of these dogs would always be the driving force that helped them face every difficulty. Max, with his protective instinct and determination to never give up, had proven that sometimes, even in the most horrific situations, loyalty and sacrifice could help people stand strong. Chris looked at Max, his eyes filled with admiration. "Thank you, Max," he said, his voice choking. "Without you, we could never have made it." Kevin approached as well, gently patting Max. "You did it all. You didn't just save lives, you saved us." Max looked up, his eyes full of gratitude, but also determination, a silent promise never to give up. The peace that seemed to have returned was fleeting, and Chris and Kevin knew their mission was far from over. The silence was just a brief pause before the next storm. While the Valor Squad continued with the rescue efforts, a greater danger loomed on the horizon. From the information they gathered, Chris and Kevin began to sense that something wasn't right. The initial reports about the chaos caused by the earthquake didn't quite match what they were seeing on the ground. There was something behind this disaster, a dark plan set in motion by the insurgents, taking advantage of the chaos to carry out their twisted agenda. The Valor Squad helped track down clues from the hardest-hit areas. Max and Rock led the way, searching through every building and alley where they believed there might be signs of the attackers. The dogs could smell traces that humans could not see, and Max's barks rang out when they detected something unusual. Then, in a moment of surprise, Max rushed into a collapsed building where the ground had cracked open, leaving a deep hole. At that instant, the beam of Kevin's flashlight caught a glint among the rubble. It was a countdown timer, ticking away steadily, but clearly not an ordinary clock. It was a bomb. "Bomb!" Chris shouted, panic rising in his voice. "We need to get out now!" But there was no time. Max stood motionless in front of the bomb, his eyes lighting up as he realized the danger. He ran toward it, barking wildly to get Kevin and Chris's attention. They couldn't just leave a bomb like this behind. They couldn't simply run away. Kevin quickly checked the map and realized the bomb was close to where many survivors were being evacuated. "We have to stop all rescue operations immediately," Kevin said, his voice tight with tension. "If that bomb goes off, we'll lose all hope." Chris stood alone, gripping Max's leash tightly, fear flooding over him. "What are we going to do about the bomb?" he asked. Kevin didn't respond right away. He knew this was the hardest decision they'd ever faced. They needed to act quickly, and the eyes of Chris and Kevin met, silently understanding that sacrifice might be their only choice. Max stood still barking incessantly, a warning signal. The dog didn't understand the bomb, but its loyalty never wavered. That's why, in this crucial moment, Max's and the Valor Squad's sacrifice once again became the most vital factor in saving everyone. Kevin made his decision. "We have to go in and disable that bomb quickly. If not, no one will survive." The Valor Squad pressed on, helping Chris and Kevin quickly reach the bomb. Max and the others led the way, carefully stepping into the danger zone. For Chris and Kevin, their focus was no longer on rescue. It was about stopping an even greater disaster waiting to happen. In those moments of intense tension, Max charged forward, using his body to shield the team. Chris and Kevin stood among the panicking crowd, urging everyone toward the escape route, shouting for them to move faster. But the survivors couldn't go any faster. Their legs trembled, staggering as if they couldn't take another step. The only thing they could feel was overwhelming fear, running with every ounce of strength, yet every step pulled them closer to death. "Hurry! Hurry up!" Chris shouted, trying to maintain his composure. He pointed towards the open exit, but the crowd seemed deaf to his command. They kept running, all of them driven by one singular instinct: escape the looming death. Amid the chaos, Corky never stopped. The smallest dog of the Valor Squad continued to run ahead, ears high, eyes bright with determination. Each stride Corky took was powerful and purposeful. His barks rang through the roar of the collapsing building like a command, like a call to action. "Follow me! Follow me!" His relentless barking cut through the panic of the crowd. Corky pushed forward, never looking back, with one singular mission: lead the survivors. He didn't stop. He didn't hesitate. He had become the only light in the overwhelming darkness. Every time Corky barked, a few more survivors found the strength to follow. They no longer thought of the fear, nor the crumbling building behind them. They just ran, blindly hoping for survival, relying on the dog as their guide. But no one realized that time was running out. As the crowd continued to rush forward, a deafening noise rang out from above, catching everyone off guard. A massive chunk of concrete fell from the ceiling, crashing down with a horrifying sound. The entire building shook violently. Fragments of plaster, shattered bricks, and thick clouds of dust suddenly filled the air. The terrifying sounds tore through the previously quiet space. The survivors nearby panicked, running back in confusion, not knowing where to go, just trying to escape before the entire structure collapsed. But Corky didn't stop. Even with everything falling apart around him, even with massive concrete blocks falling right before him, Corky kept barking, leading the way. "Follow me! Run faster!" His barks echoed through the chaos. The survivors, their legs trembling, kept running, following the dog like he was the last beacon of hope left in the smog-filled air. "Be careful!" Kevin shouted, but no one could hear him. Everything had gone too fast, too terribly wrong. All they could do was run, seeing nothing but a panicked crowd and the dog guiding them. A man stumbled and fell, unable to get up. Corky dashed over, using his strong paws to lift the man, and then continued leading the others, never stopping. "Corky!" Chris shouted, but his voice was drowned out by the overwhelming noise. The little dog didn't stop, didn't turn back. He just kept pushing forward, leading the survivors away from the collapsing building. With every piece of concrete falling behind, each paw print Corky left in the shattered ground marked another step of survival. One step, then another. Under Corky's guidance, the survivors kept running, clinging to the hope that the dog was their path to safety. The survivors could no longer keep up, but they could still hear Corky's determined barks, and that was all they needed to keep moving. And then, at that exact moment, Max charged in from behind, undeterred by the rubble around him. He didn't stop. He didn't hesitate. Max ran into the most dangerous area, where only life or death awaited to save the last person. He no longer thought of himself. All he cared about was the mission, saving lives. The roar of the collapsing building, the hurried footsteps, and the constant barks of Corky blended into a chaotic yet resolute scene. The survivors pushed forward. "Run faster! Hurry up!" Chris shouted, his voice echoing through the tense air, every word full of urgency and determination. He pointed toward the west side of the building, his eyes glued to the crumbling walls. "Head to the west side. Save them first. It's about to collapse." Max, the loyal companion, led the way, guiding the last survivors toward safety. Just as a group neared the escape door, a violent aftershock hit. A wall from above crashed down, and everything around them was quickly engulfed in thick dust and debris. Max charged forward, blocking the debris just in time to see one of the survivors trapped under the rubble. Without hesitation, Max crouched down, using his sharp claws to dig through the debris, trying to free the trapped person. Both Chris and Kevin witnessed Max's incredible action. The dog wasn't just protecting humans, he was ready to sacrifice his own life. But in the final moments, as Max kept digging, a deafening explosion rang out. Pieces of concrete fell, burying Max under the rubble. There was no time to escape. Chris and Kevin stood frozen, unable to believe their eyes. Max, their incredible friend, was lying still beneath the debris. They rushed over, not thinking about the danger that still surrounded them. Kevin pulled Max from the rubble, but the dog didn't respond. A heavy silence fell over all three of them. Only the cold wind blew through the fallen walls and shattered debris. The silence stretched on, but the light from the escape door still shone, lighting the path ahead. The survivors continued running, rushing forward, seeing hope in that light. They had been led out of certain death by Max's courage and the Valor Squad. Now those who survived could continue walking, though they would never know that Max had sacrificed himself to protect them. Chris hurriedly bent down, patting Max once more, tears streaming down his face. "Thank you, Max," he whispered through choking sobs. "You didn't just save people, you saved us. We'll always remember you." Kevin also knelt, patting Max, his voice full of sorrow. "Thank you, Max. We couldn't have done it without you. You sacrificed yourself for all of us. You are a hero." Though Max had passed, the spirit of this canine hero would live on in the hearts of those who remained. Chris and Kevin promised that Max's sacrifice, along with that of the entire Valor Squad, would never be in vain. They would continue their rescue mission, continuing to give life to those still alive and forever carry the loyalty Max had shown them. Amid the rubble, surrounded by the remains of a collapsed building, Chris and Kevin realized that this fight wasn't just about physical survival. It was a victory of loyalty, courage, and the unwavering bond between them and their brave canine companions. Sacrifice and the unconditional love the Valor Squad had shown to them and to all those they had saved. Chris and Kevin would never forget Max and everything he had done. Canine Speed had completed the rescue mission, but the cost was incredibly high. Max, Rock, Corky, and Cake had fought relentlessly, overcoming every challenge, saving countless innocent lives. But Max, the leader of the Valor Squad, could not survive the final crisis. Still, Max had fulfilled his mission, and his sacrifice marked a pivotal point in this battle. Chris and Kevin stood, gazing at the Valor Squad, their hearts filled with pride and sorrow. Max, Rock, Corky, and Cake were not just rescue dogs. They were silent warriors, loyal companions who never abandoned them. Though Max had fallen, his sacrifice had saved thousands of lives and proved that loyalty and friendship are invaluable, irreplaceable treasures. Chris took a deep breath, his gaze lingering on the spot where Max had stood before sacrificing himself. "Max did everything he could," he said, his voice dropping. "He wasn't just a rescue dog. He was a loyal friend, a warrior who never gave up." Kevin nodded, his eyes slightly misty from the tears. "We'll never forget Max. He led us, protected the Valor Squad, and fought until the very last moment." In those moments, though there was a bittersweet sense of loss and pain, Chris and Kevin realized that the Valor Squad was not just made up of rescue dogs. They were silent warriors, tireless friends, always ready to sacrifice everything to save people, to bring hope to innocent lives. Despite all the trials they had faced, Max had proven himself to be a steadfast warrior. But above all, he was the ideal example of loyalty, unconditional friendship, and noble sacrifice. Max hadn't just saved people. He had taught Chris and Kevin and the entire Valor Squad that sometimes those moments of sacrifice are the greatest victories in life. Max had stood strong in the battle against natural disasters, against insurgents, and every challenge no one could have anticipated. He didn't give up despite facing danger, despite enduring the harshness of life. And when the final moments came, Max still fought to protect the Valor Squad and the innocent civilians, making his sacrifice even more heroic. "We can't leave Max behind," Chris said, his voice thick with emotion. He fought for us until the end. That's a sacrifice we will never forget." Kevin stood beside him, his head bowed. "He wasn't just a dog. Max was a hero. He saved us. We have to keep going to finish the mission of the team." With this immense loss, Chris and Kevin knew they could not stop. They had to continue saving people and continue protecting the innocent, just like Max had done. Even without Max by their side, the Valor Squad still had other powerful warriors: Rock, Corky, and Cake, loyal friends who would keep fighting. Max had taught them the value of sacrifice and friendship in every circumstance. Though he could no longer continue the journey, his strength and loyalty would forever live on in every action of the Valor Squad. Chris looked towards the Valor Squad, his eyes filled with a renewed determination. Max did everything he could. Now, we have to finish this mission, for him and for everyone the Valor Squad has saved. Kevin nodded, his voice unwavering. "Exactly. We can't give up. Max fought for us, and we won't let his sacrifice be in vain. The Valor Squad will carry on, because every life saved is a victory." The dogs of the Valor Squad, though tired, continued their work. They weren't just rescuing people. They were reminding the survivors of the power of loyalty and sacrifice. And Chris, Kevin, along with the Valor Squad, would never forget Max, the steadfast companion who never backed down. The journey of the Valor Squad was a living testament to loyalty, sacrifice, and the strength of unconditional friendship. Each dog in the team demonstrated extraordinary resilience, not only fighting against natural disasters, but also protecting innocent lives in the most dangerous of circumstances. Max, Rock, Corky, and Cake, all of them were silent warriors, fighting until the very last moment, until the mission was completed. There's so much to learn from the Valor Squad. They are not only wonderful companions, but also models of perseverance, sacrifice, and determination. It's their friendship and loyalty that helped them overcome everything. Life can be full of challenges, but with unity, courage, and love, we can overcome it all. Always remember, every small action we take, whether saving a life or sharing a smile, can make a difference.